Very, very welcome to Dublin Commuter Coalition's first in-person session post-COVID. Yay! For those that I suppose don't know us, and pretty much if you're on any social media, you probably do know us, or we're sufficiently infamous that you would have heard of us. We are an advocacy group for all types of sustainable travel. We don't advocate for one bus route. We don't advocate for comfort on the dart. We don't just advocate for inclusive transport. We try to look across the whole system of transport and figure out together how we're going to bring Dublin to the sustainable zero carbon city that we need for the future. So we look at pedestrians and the needs of pedestrians. We look at those of all abilities and their needs. We try to be conscious of what bikes need, and then we regard ourselves as utter nerds on all things public transport, buses, darts, Lewis, trains. We even have space for cars as long as cars know their place in the urban city of the future. This evening, we talk a lot about commuting because that's what so much of transport has been designed for, how people get from their home to their place of work in a very sort of 20th century way of moving. What we want to talk about this evening is a bit of a departure from that. It is beyond commuting. What are all the other types of movements that Dubs do to get to and from what they need to do to live their life, and how sustainable transport can fit within that. And this goes across health, across sport, across religion, across leisure, across all the various ways that we live our life. A few housekeeping issues first. So fire exits, in case we start lighting lighters and things get a bit out of hand. The fire exit on the back, which will take you down to the Shakespeare pub, I'm told. We have an exit down the back. We have loos down the back. I have 3 kids, so I will repeat what I always say to my 3 kids: if you need to go to the loo, go now. And final housekeeping request: could you please now, as I made a mistake yesterday at my kids' graduation ceremony from primary school, please turn off your phones so that it doesn't go off in the middle of a minister's speech. We're going to kick off with a fireside chat. No fire because the minister has cancelled fires, led by my colleague Feljin, and that's going to run to about 7:30. Short break then is the plan until about 7:45. We would hope that the minister is here at 7:45, and we're more or less all in our seats at that stage. And then Kirsten will lead a Q&A with the Minister. Open to have lots and lots of questions, lots of discussion, to try and nut out these problems. If you can, keep your questions on topic. The topic of today is not the RT PSA interview. Please keep your questions as questions, not diatribes. And please keep your questions brief, unlike my few words this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Conor. We're actually having a little bit of issues with the streaming, so I'm going to take it very, very slowly at the beginning while I catch up. But yeah, let's start with introductions. I'll let you do your own introductions, but this is Aaron Copeland from a Playful City, Janis Morrissey from the Irish Heart Foundation, Dr. Ciara Murphy from the Jesuit Centre for Faith and Justice, and Professor Brian Caufield from Trinity College, Dublin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your groups, and kind of your background in advocacy or academia? Start with Brian, or yeah.
Okay. So I'm Brian Caufield. I'm a professor in transportation in Trinity, and I'm also the head of civil engineering in there. I started my PhD. I did my PhD, finished it in 2002, and that was on real-time public transport information. So since then, it was before ghost buses, and it was before smart apps as well, when we were looking at WAP on smartphones. But anyway, but since then I've been very active in the field of transport. I'm very active in the field of decarbonising transport. At the moment, I work in the Centre for Transport Research. Currently in the team, there's, I was talking to people earlier, there's 9 PhDs that are working on different aspects of transportation, mainly around climate and how to reduce emissions, and 6 postdocs. Again, all working on, mainly at the moment it's nationally funded research on how we get people out of their cars and how we hit that 50%. And then I do a bit of advocacy work as well, and I sometimes I'm on the media talking about public transport and how to make it better. But and it's great to be invited here tonight, because I think the coalition has brought something that was sorely needed in the mix in terms of the narrative that's out there on transport. And to get the commuters, it's all well and good of people that we're used to coming up to Dublin to do the shop, and they think that they should be able to drive wherever they want to in the city. It's good that Dubliners are kind of hitting back a bit and saying, this is what we want our city to be. And I know it was a couple of months ago, Gary Gannon said something really powerful about it, that all these people are streaming into our city. I didn't mean this to become a TED talk, sorry to add, but that are streaming into our city, and they're causing all this air pollution, and we're the people living in this city, and it is our city, and how do we change that? And I've probably gone way over, sorry.
So I'm Ciara. I work with the Jesuit Centre for Faith and Justice as the environmental policy advocate. So my background is actually in environmental biology, so I kind of have come into transport in a bit of a segue. So my role within the Jesuits is any and all environmental advocacy, which you cannot talk about environment and sustainability unless you talk about transport and how we move around and how we get places. So one of the big things that we're looking at is, and my everyone that I work with, we are all avid cyclists, and it's our team discussions are always very how difficult it is to get around in Dublin, and to get around safely in Dublin, and safety is the main thing. So that's where I'm coming from this. So it is as a general environmental advocate.
Hi everybody, so I'm from the Irish Heart Foundation. I'm the Director of Health Promotion, and I'm really pleased to be here, because I think that kind of intersectoral piece is so important in that alliance building, that there's such a diversity of voices. We're all calling for the same thing, and I'm sure there'll be huge consistency in what we're all saying this evening, and so I think it's great to have the opportunity to bring the health perspective here as well. So we do an awful lot of advocacy work around kind of shaping the environment, or the world that we live in. 80% of premature heart disease and stroke is preventable. I want to say early or premature, it's like under 65, so it shouldn't be that way. We're a rich country, there's no excuse. So the key drivers of that premature heart disease and stroke are things like a lack of an active lifestyle. And that's not to blame any individual. It's not a collective lack of willpower. It's not because it's bad luck. It's because of the world that we live in doesn't support us to be active, and that has a huge knock-on effect in terms of our health and our heart health. So I suppose that's why I'm here. So looking forward to this evening's discussion.
And a former committee member.
Yes. Full disclosure.
I'm Eamon from Playful, and I was doing a lot of work in art in the public, and that brought me to Upstart Collective a few years back. We built a park in Parnell Street, and it was the involvement of a number of young people in the project. They built a theatre that we spent a year working on, that really kind of sparked my interest in working with young people in terms of building their own environment. A lot of them were made homeless when they were moved out of those flats at the top of Parnell Street years ago. So I had my own children and realised that there was very little for parents and children in the city. In fact, it was a debt trap in a lot of places. So pushed a lot of energy into Playful, and what we do is we work at creating intergenerational spaces by engaging community in a number of temporary ways. So we work on all sorts of different things, but the main focus is on starting with children and then working our way out into engaging the rest of the community. So that's where I'm coming from with this.
Thanks. So the theme tonight is sustainable transport for life. So I thought I'd just begin by asking you to talk about your kind of journey through transport. Like personally, I grew up, my parents didn't have a car. I was brought everywhere on buses, motorbikes for a long time, bicycles, and then started going everywhere, even if it's ridiculous. Just bloody mindedly going places without cars, walking on country roads and stuff like that. Just kind of, just your personal experience with trying to get around on sustainable transport, or just using transport in Ireland, in Dublin especially, over your life really. Reverse order.
So I grew up in Raheny. My father worked in town and I went to school on the south side of Dublin. So I would have spent my entire life out on the road. There was 63 kids and 15 dogs on my road, and we spent our time on an old construction site, finding glass and breaking it and lighting fires and things like that, and climbing trees to get over the height of the houses and just enjoying swaying in the wind. It was bikes growing up, a lot of walking around, and then about 5th class I started getting the Dart over to Sydney Parade, and gradually by the time I was finishing school I bought a 2CV and drove that for about 15 years, and that kind of gave me a kind of a defensive outlook in terms of motoring, and then just gave up fully on the car because just traffic was insane. And I've become just obsessed with bikes. I've always biked, but particularly, friends glaze over. My brother gives me dead arms when I start talking about this. So it's good to be in this type of safe environment.
Safe place.
That's kind of where I'm from. But we spent all our time out on the road. Just messing around.
Interesting to hear about the kind of freedom bikes gave you kind of growing up as a child, which a lot of children don't have now, because children aren't allowed to go more than a couple of 100 metres from their house. It's definitely not on a bicycle. So, Janis?
I grew up in a 70s housing estate in Swords, and very similar to what you're saying there, lots of walking and cycling and freedom and all of that, and I walked or got the bus for work and education and school, college, all of that. So I suppose that was my norm. I wasn't driven everywhere by my parents, so it's fortunate to have that, and I suppose that's just been my norms. I've known any different in a way. I haven't cycled since I was about 10 or 12, so as this is a safe space, I'm comfortable to say that. And I suppose I just never, I just never felt confident at all, and in a way I kind of just never even thought about it. But I'm really fortunate to live near the Dodder Valley Greenway, and now I've applied for the Bike to Work scheme, and I'm getting a bike, and I never thought that would ever happen. And it's it's amazing to have that amazing space for family recreation, and I'm really looking forward to be able to go for family cycles, and that side. And I know that's part of what we're talking about today. I mean, I work in Mines. I'm not sure I'd ever feel confident to cycle to Portobello Bridge, but maybe in time. So for me, as a mother, I've 3 children, 2 in primary school and 1 in play school, and the older 2 from the age of 8 have cycled to school, and I'm just so happy that we live in this place that, the cycle in the past, there aren't amazing cycleways or anything, but we're very lucky with that, and I can just see how they've flourished with that independence, been able to make their own decisions, take their own risks, and the benefits that that's brought them as they've developed as little creatures into bigger creatures with opinions. So for me, it's that kind of enabling kind of piece as well, that we tell people to be more active, for better health or whatever in the world that I work in, but unless people are supported to do that, it's just not possible. So I suppose they're kind of my main motivations. And just one other thing, kids, I don't get to include it later on, is my kids play GAA, and that's great, sport's great and all the rest of it, but when you have away matches, each individual parent drives to the away match individually, and I have, as a parent, have an advocate for this, so it's on me too, with our club. But there's no carpooling, or there's no kind of hiring of a bus or whatever, and I think those kind of things need to change as well. So it's I suppose they're kind of the things that are in my mind.
So I actually grew up in Longford, so not Longford town, in Granard, so in County Longford, and there if you didn't have a car, you actually wouldn't be able to get many places. Public transport's not great. So growing up, we always did have a car, and we were driven pretty much everywhere. But after a while, you kind of realise that it was a bit mental. Some of the places, like we definitely could have cycled or walked to school, but we were always driven. And it was only when you go past the stage where you're like, yeah, no, this is something that we definitely should have done. But we were lucky in that we were in walking distance to town, so we, as kids, we did have independence to kind of walk in, and some of the roads were safe, so you were able to kind of cycle around a little bit. But once I got my driver's license, I very consciously never bought a car, because I knew as soon as I'd get one, I'd use it even if I didn't need it. And when I was studying in Dublin, I didn't. I could get the train home, and when I was home, I could borrow my parents' car, which was much cheaper. So I've never had a car, and the not having one just makes you realise that there is ways of getting around places. It is a lot more complicated. Like as Feljin was saying, you can be very determined not to use a car. But like you, I didn't like cycling in Dublin, and last year I got the Bike to Work scheme, and I love my bike, and I found a route that I'm fairly confident in, and now I love it. I'm like, it's brilliant. You go past, it takes the same length of time as a Lewis, you go past all the cars, you get to give out to them, and yeah, no, it's brilliant. But the more you cycle, the more I have realised that I am lucky that I'm confident enough to do it, and it is not safe, and sometimes it's not pleasant, but this is what we're here for. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm glad I'm not the only non-dub. So I grew up in Waterford, and getting to school was on the bike, and it was until I finished my leaving cert. Then I moved up to Dublin when I was 17. Brought the bike up at the start, but then the bike fell by the wayside. It was just too dangerous, and I again never got my confidence back. And as somebody that sees the data all the time, I know it's still too dangerous out there, and we need to do better work at designing our roads for that. But since I moved to Dublin, it was public transport. That's how I got in, and Trinity's very well connected to public transport, so I'm very lucky with that. I've lived in different parts of the city. My first house that I owned was in Dublin 8 in Kilmainham, which was great. It was walking distance to Trinity, so that was fantastic. But now I live out in Goatstown, so it's a bit further out, but the Lewis and the number 11, which is an amazing bus service, depending upon the time of day that you get it. I do have a car because I've got 3 dogs, and there's no cargo bike or bus or whatever that would well, the Basset Hound would be fine on anything, she'd fall asleep, but the others, no way would they survive on public transport. But I suppose growing up in Waterford and coming up to Dublin, because my family are from Dublin, it was one of the things that we did when we came up. And I remember my parents would bring us in, and we would drive into the city. The big thing that I always wanted to do was to get the bus back to my grandfather's house, and that was because you could go upstairs in a bus, and this was, for a kid from Waterford, this was alien, and it was fantastic. So I suppose that's where kind of my love for transport started, and then I'm very lucky to be able to dedicate my career to researching how to make it better in this city and others.
It's interesting that you mentioned Trinity, because I think Trinity has a 1% car use across the students and staff, which is amazing. But like you said, it's probably the most well-connected area in the country. It
is, and it's very close to another campus that has much higher car usage, where elected officials go to on a daily basis.
So I think there's a common theme there of people growing up on bikes and on buses, and we talk about a sustainable transport network, but we had a sustainable transport network in the 70s, 80s, even 90s before the kind of increase in car usage. It's a very similar theme across all 4 panellists. I just want to talk briefly about kind of the deficiencies you see in the current transport network. I think most people can probably agree on that, so I don't want to spend too long on it. So, so when it comes to traveling for leisure or shopping or childcare, worship, for any of these things, outside of the 9 to 5, like where do you see the deficiencies? Like people mentioned, too dangerous to cycle for a lot of people, but even just walking and public transport, where do you see the deficiencies? Starting first with you.
So I guess we live in a cul-de-sac in Rahy, so I would start there. So the road itself is very safe. Our kids play outside all the time. So in terms of just being able to literally just open the door and the kids go outside, it's the first port of call for children. It's their doorstep to kind of engage with their community. And then outside of that, it's to the shop that they're able to walk up to. They've only just started walking up to the village on their own. They're 10 and 9, and then it's the football is the issue. I guess that's why we have a car. We also, my wife's from Dingle, so and my mother's from Leitrim, so we have family on both sides there where we holiday. So the car in rural Ireland is pretty essential with the 2 children. That said, we get the train a lot as much as we can, but the issue is the football. I think if the kids have an away game, there isn't a culture that kind of questions everybody individual. It's just such an ordeal. It's anyone who does it knows when you're going across from over to the, I don't know where, but like another 2 hours of driving in the day to get to a football match and back. It can be pretty frustrating. So that for me is the sports culture of just arranging matches for under 9s across the city when I'm not that sporty, so my kids are asking me about sport all the time and I just never know what to say to them. So film and music maybe, but not sport. So when they so I never feel it's my place. I don't want to be the cranky dad giving out about the transport arrangements in the team. I feel intimidated by sporty people sometimes, so I just don't. But that's the one thing I always see as the big issue, is the culture of organising games all over the city, and I'm not quite sure what the value is of that. I just think it could be a smaller leagues, but the younger lads, I mean, but that, and then we're lucky, we're a local school. We started a cycle bus a number of years back, so we've a very safe route through the park. So yeah, look through the park. My kids are literally finding a new mushroom on the tree today. It's very Shangri-La, I know, but it's lovely. It's that kind of thing. So that for me is the big one, is that, and then just driver entitlement. Like there's a man tried to push through, maybe leave a foot and a half on my 9-year-old in the car. So it's just the culture of I think of just that entitlement, that you can, no matter what, because you're faster, you can go, you deserve the space more. So I guess that's a big barrier, and we're working on a few projects that address that, but it's kind of something that is, for me, is the big one, is sport. That's the one. If we ever need the second car and the go-kart has to be taken out, that's when we do it, because even though they're the same club, they're always going off in different ways on the weekend. So
yeah, we have sports and pets.
Yeah.
So far, any other major deficiencies that people?
I think.
Takers? Yeah, Janis.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the marketing kind of piece, because I talked earlier about we're kind of products of the world that we live in, and part of the world that we live in is the marketing, the advertising, and it's kind of obviously in the news at the moment around certain headline news items in terms of certain car makers, but that's kind of normalised these kind of there's the straight up ads that are purchased, but there's also the commercial arrangements, the sponsorship deals, sponsorship programs, and all of that as well, and that's just absorbed by osmosis. That's just the environment we live in, and we don't even really think about it or call it out, but I think it's even subliminally that has a real impact in terms of what's viewed as normal and socially acceptable. And a lot of work we do in the Irish Heart Foundation is around junk food marketing to kids, and around tobacco advertising and marketing. And you see the same playbook whether you're talking about junk food or tobacco or fossil fuels or the car manufacturers. It's all the same strategies. So I think that's a real deficiency, that hasn't been tackled. And the lobbying as well that goes on by commercial entities. So that really kind of frames the narrative, and I think that's really important to kind of call out as a deficiency as well. And the other thing that struck me in preparing for this evening was, I think some people, there can be a snobbishness around using public transport. I remember a boss of mine many years ago just totally not comfortable with getting the bus, and as I explained earlier, I've always got the bus everywhere, so it's my norm, but just that kind of no, I'd rather get the car, just mixing with people, not comfortable. And I think kind of I think there's a mindset shift in terms of there's the converted like all of us, but if we want to kind of normalise using walking, cycling, public transport as the default ways of getting around the city and county, then that needs to be kind of gently tackled maybe as well.
I think it was Pat Kenny who once proudly told me on air that he hasn't taken a bus in 20 years. And like you said, marketing, some RTE TV stars with car sponsorship deals in the news this week. Just want to talk about, I think Aaron, you mentioned that it may not be your place to talk about the kind of structures and leagues and the distance you have to travel, and you feel out of place bringing it up. So I just want to maybe ask about difficult conversations you may have had about transport with other people, with family, friends, about maybe their car use, or it's a very, very difficult conversation to have. It's one that I try to avoid, but it's one that has to be had. So maybe Ciara.
It is always an awkward conversation, and it always kind of comes up a good bit. Usually around cyclists, there is like mainly at home, not so much. Well, definitely in Dublin as well, but like even talking from people at home, or like there's such a hostility against cyclists, and I don't really understand it. And I think it is kind of the absorption by osmosis of just everything that's in the media at the minute, or just the culture, and it's just absorbed, and it's really it can feel not violent, but like kind of aggressive. And so yeah, even just the right of cyclists to be on the road, or you're holding everyone up, or like, what are you doing there? And at home, even I went to, it wasn't really a difficult conversation, but even I cycled to my friend's house when I was at home. I brought my bike, it was lovely, and I parked outside, and then the husband was like, "Oh, I see you're travelling in style," and I was just like, yeah, so it's just really, really unusual for anyone to cycle anywhere at home for anything apart from just to go for a cycle. And then the other one would be just even with family members, of when you're going places, and I'd be like, this is somewhere we can definitely walk to, or we don't need the car, or and that's the kind of the balance with like family and friends, where you don't want to input your kind of position too much and then just over their personal preference. And it's always it's a funny balance. And yeah, it is. And I think there's one more that just kind of comes to mind is I work for the Jesuit Centre for Faith and Justice, and within our team we're all very pro cycling and public transport, but in like religious organisations, or it's sustainable transport isn't there as a topic really. I brought it up once and it was immediately dismissed of like, oh, people can't walk to church, it's too far. So it's like this, it wasn't Dublin. In fairness, it wasn't Dublin centric. I think the priest was from Donegal, so he may have had a small point, but it's just not, it's not considered as a thing of how people should get to church. It's just not, like, there's no bicycle parking at churches, there's a lot of car parking, and that's kind of the difficult conversation that I will be having quite a lot, I suppose.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
Recently, a friend of mine, they bought a new house and they had a driveway. They didn't have a driveway, and the first thing that was said to me as I was walking up the driveway was like, "Oh, we can buy 2 cars now." And I was like, I think part of it was to wind me up. There was also an EV charging point there, but maybe just to go back to the thing that you were saying about the gaps, and there's loads of gaps that you can talk about physical infrastructure and certain things that have not been done. One of the things that I don't think enough work has been done on is the kind of there was a report published 3 years ago now in Our Shoes, and there's been very little work done, I think, at least on the gender imbalance that we see in both cycling, in the use of public transport, safety and security. And that report is fantastic. It's really, really well researched. There's lots of really actionable findings in it, and I don't see it happening. And you see, like when I finish up here this evening, I'll get on the Lewis, and I bet you the gender split that was on the Lewis compared to what I got coming in will be completely different. But when you go to another, say if you go to, I remember being in Madrid one night, coming home from dinner, we were at a conference or something, and you could see on the underground, it was diversity in terms of age, in terms of gender, everybody felt safe. That's not something I see yet. And one of the key things, and I know the coalition has been calling for this as well, is that I think people need to feel more secure on public transport, and I think that could make that kind of gap hopefully disappear.
Yeah, the report is Travelling in a Woman's Shoes by TII, published in 2020, if people want to look that up. And like I said, I think there's probably safety in numbers, and there's probably, I think if a wider cross-section of society is seen travelling on public transport, it's generally safer. It's something that we've brought up before when it comes to antisocial behaviour, greater investment in seeing more and more people from all walks of life using public transport could lead to better safety, community safety, diversity in strength, age, gender, race and socio-economic background.
But it's also kind of basic things around lighting, around where the stops are, that people can feel safer getting to and from them.
Yeah, definitely huge deficits around bus stop infrastructure and interchanges and a lot of other things. So we've talked about issues. I think I want to dedicate the rest of the time to solutions. So we can talk about what to invest in and all we want, but what are your kind of priority things to divert resources to solve this issue and get a kind of broader sustainable transport network that serves all sorts of purposes? We kind of highlighted the issue. So what are your priority investment opportunities? I think here.
I just wanted to say that we were working on a project in Sallynoggin called Love Our Laneways, which was examining the laneways in that area as active travel routes for children and the whole community. But in fact, they were built. The laneways in Sallynoggin specifically were built as cut-throughs for Mass, for going to Mass. So that was done in the 1950s, obviously, when all of that was not questioned. And what was interesting though was that they were just tarred. So they were tarred laneways that would go just cut through the estate, Pierce Estate. And what was interesting was that a lot of people would have felt today unsafe, and it was specifically around lighting and specifically around, I don't like using this term because I don't really know what it means, antisocial behaviour, but it's that idea where just the feeling of being unsafe, I guess. And so it was just interesting that you were making the point about not walking to Mass, but when entire neighbourhoods were built with the idea that you walked to where you needed to get to, and you accommodated people so they didn't have to walk all the way around the blocks. it was just kind of something that I just wanted to mention. But I guess that would be one of the things that we'd really be pushing for, and I know Fingal County Council are looking at this in relation to play infrastructure, where you stop thinking about playgrounds as the solution to children's physical activity, but the actual routes around, and specifically play streets, streets that are designated for playing on, nothing too structured, nothing too focused on what the adult says they should be playing. So whether it's a slide, that means you go up the steps and down the slide. There's very few ways you can actually interpret a play object like that. So it's about trying to create environments that are playful without being without telling people how to play by default. So those are the kind of two kind of just that came to mind just there in terms of solutions, is stop building destination areas for children when they can just play outside in the road.
You mentioned the laneways. There's every month I look at the Dublin City Council agenda, and there's one new laneway. Basically motion, or basically the councillors have to agree on it, to extinguish the public right of way through the laneways and to put a gate across it because of antisocial behaviour. And like, again, it's a very difficult conversation to have, but we can't keep closing down all the kind of paths, permeability around what are already very impermeable housing estates from last century. Solutions?
Yeah, I think there's two things that spring to mind for me. One is, what I think I mentioned earlier in the introduction, is that kind of alliance building piece. I think it's really important that it's not just pigeonholing kind of the cyclists want more cycling stuff. That it's that diversity of lots of different perspectives. I think that's a real strength, and I think the more alliance building we can do, and that kind of collective voice, I think is really, really powerful. And the other thing is around celebrating successes, and kind of I think that's really important in terms of winning hearts and minds and bringing people along with us as well, because obviously it can be lots of really divisive discussions can be had, but I think we need to, and I saw this again with the Dodder Valley Greenway, where there was a huge amount of investment. It looks absolutely amazing, but they did a really nice video that I'm sure lots of you saw, that kind of going, wow, like look at this facility, that so it kind of closed the loop in terms of all of the public consultation and all of the stages that the planning goes through, but celebrating the success of, now we have this amazing facility within our local community. So I think kind of measuring the benefits, documenting the benefits, and celebrating and sharing them, I think is really important.
I actually think my solution kind of chimes in with the last two. So one of the things we always think of is kind of like the placemaking. So sustainable transport and active transport isn't just about the transport links, it's about making the place better. So even just by slowing people down and taking them out of their cars, it is automatically creating community, because people bump into each other, there's more areas to stay. Once you take away space for cars, you can create space for biodiversity. You can create biodiversity strips that's pleasant to walk along, pleasant to cycle along. And one of my favourite kind of stories that I always that I've heard about is a school in Galway, and it's one of the Jesuit schools, and it's kind of, I can't remember exactly where it is, but it's kind of in it's inner city, and it's at the end of a really narrow residential area. And when I was talking to the teacher about it, they were like, it was absolutely chaotic. It was so stressful for people dropping kids off. It was dangerous. There was a lot of air pollution. A lot of people couldn't get in, couldn't get out. Very, very stressful, unpleasant environment. And they decided to do a pilot of having just a car-free lane. And the pilot worked so well that they've made it permanent, and they worked really hard with the county council and the engineer and with the parents, and there was a lot of pushback, but a lot of silent support, where I was like, keep going. And the teacher said it has absolutely transformed not just the drop off, but the entire school experience. So when you're saying playful streets, so there's no cars allowed on it, kids arrive early so they can play soccer with each other before they go into school. The residents of the street now decorate their house, and they put flowers outside, and they sit outside to talk to the kids as they're going in and as they're leaving. And as a teacher, I think the quote was, they're nestled in the community rather than assaulting it. And it was just such a lovely thing. And they were saying, like, it's a very small scale thing. Like, it doesn't get the kids from A to B because a lot of the rest of the route is unsafe. But for that one patch, it has showcased just how important it is to have clean air, to have space where kids can play with each other before they go in, not have to worry about cars. Parents are less stressed. A lot of the teachers are actually cycling now. So they've removed the cars, but as they've done it, they've created a really lovely community space, and it's just the place building and the community building that goes with it. So yeah, I think anyone who thinks about transport ends up being into like urban design accidentally.
Nestled in the community as opposed to assaulting it like that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So, yeah, I suppose in the solution, that's a great example of, like, so I would work with the NTA and the department quite a bit about, you know, how we evaluate and how we model these different types of transport solutions, and those benefits there of playing soccer before you go to school, the teachers saying they're, you know, more attentive and all, that never gets into a planning sheet, or never gets into cost benefit analysis. And that, I suppose, human story that you need to talk to your local councillors and TDs. They're all going to be looking for something for you in the next 12 months, so make sure you say to them. And solutions, if you talk about the big things, I was involved in the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy, and, you know, just do that would be the first thing I would say. But if I could have one thing, it would be a directly elected Dublin mayor. If you look at the cities that are doing it right, if you look at Lisbon, and if you look at Paris, Barcelona, Gothenburg, Stockholm, London, any of the cities that are doing it right have a mayor, they have a person that's there, they have a mandate from the people, and the people say, this is what we want. Paris, get rid of all the cars, and that's what she's doing. The cars are going. In Dublin, there's somebody there trying to get rid of all the cars, but, you know, you're not elected, you're a CEO, you're a civil servant, you have no mandate to do any of this. We need a directly elected Dublin mayor. We need one in all of our cities, and the kind of key thing that I'm hearing here is, we're not doing it right in Dublin. How on earth is any other city or town going to do it right in this island if we're not getting it right?
I kind of want to go to questions now, but unless anyone has anything else to...
Can you hear me? There we go. Yeah, I was going to go to questions unless people have anything else to add from the panel on solutions, or...
I just wanted to add one thing. I think community engagement obviously is key, and it's hyper local. It's very easy to roll out if you like an agenda, big cycle, and our evil agenda to push cars and drivers off the road. It's something we've been looking at, something with Laois County Council, and we were speaking with over 500 children in the local national schools, and you're looking at about 60, just over 65%, 64.3 I think, are driven to school, and 7 out of 10 of those would prefer to cycle or engage in active travel, whether it's park and stride or walk. And then of the children that do cycle, 10 out of 10 of those want to cycle. 1 in 4 of those unprompted said that traffic was their biggest fear, the thing that made them feel most unsafe. And so when you actually engage, and this is our engagement methodology, if you like, when you engage with those hard to reach groups, for example, young people, and then feed that back into the community through, we're running a number of prototypes at the moment, and then feed that back to the community. One lady stopped the signage that we were just feeding back what the children were saying in the surveys, and she was saying it gave her goosebumps, and it was just that kind of idea where I think it's really important for a community to have a conversation with itself through real-time, one-to-one ratio things, objects that you can actually be in a space with. So back to placemaking, so you can feel how it feels to step down a lip off a curb for for a blind man living in Sallynoggin, that was a big deal for him. For the lady in the wheelchair, she wanted the straight through. So it was those kind of micro problems that present themselves for very specific areas were always a big issue. But I think the main thing is that a consultation or any of those conversations you have with a community is a dialogue that goes back and forth before the plan drops onto people's laps, so that everybody's informed the plan, that they feel that they've gotten a sense of where they're going with things before it even starts. Because I think too often the plan's drawn up, there's some great beautiful ideas in it, but it doesn't actually address some of the specific needs of specific individuals. And as soon as you get people emotional, I think one or two on the WhatsApp group is enough to really bring an awful lot of challenges to an organisation who's looking to roll out a larger scale thing. So I guess that would be for us, nothing works unless the community's engaged. Nothing. So it's that simple.
Just to kind of echo that, I think when you've said it so beautifully, but I think it's that whole concept of kind of nothing about us without us, and I think that's so important. And we have a children and young people team in the Irish Heart Foundation, and we do a huge amount of work with underserved communities, and co-designing with young people and helping them to see that they have a voice and that they are valued and that they can change their classroom, their school, their wider community, and supporting that kind of life skill around kind of active citizenship, that that you can have a healthier community with less air pollution or a safer walking route, and supporting them to develop those skills, which you might think is really removed from heart disease, but actually it's those kind of enabling pieces that actually help to shape the world. So great to hear the work you're doing too.
Just back to something that Aaron said, one of the best pieces that I saw this year was the Bike Library project. I'm just reading the article here now. Harold's Cross Educate Together. After starting the project in September last year, the school is now almost car free. There are now 150 bikes parked in the schoolyard, most of them belonging to children. So there's hope. Yeah. Francesco Pilla, yeah. So if people have questions in the audience, there's one that I saw in the YouTube channel that I can back to. So raise your hands and Jay-Z will come around to you with the mic.
I probably should take my question out better as hands up. I suppose the big issues, there's so many issues, but one of the issues would be around the kind of term multimodal travel. So, for example, if you're, I cycle every day, but there's some places that, as my body gets a bit more tired, I just are too far to cycle to that I need to get to, and you're kind of looking at, can I take my bike on a bus? No. Can I put my bike on a Lewis? No. Is there any way to lock my bike at the Lewis stop or at the bus stop? No. So it's that whole kind of sense of multimodal travel, and then also, you're cycling in the bus lane. So in my head, buses are still something that I just, wrestle with on a day-to-day basis. The pollution out of them is phenomenal. I have to share the road with them. I kind of forget the things I can actually use to get places. Because somebody said that 3 months ago, talking to a friend, I was like, how did you get there? I was like, I took the bus. And I was like, so it is that sense, I suppose, in their heads. There's still something. I know other people around feel the same way, that a bus is still something you're nearly killed by on a kind of regular basis. So how do we kind of address that? It's just a basic thing. There's plenty of countries in the world where they manage to integrate bikes with buses. You can see it in America, which is the most car-dependent place going. And what is the barriers and functions, and just places to have bikes in town, just as a super basic thing. Even like coming up and down O'Connell Street trying to find somewhere. There was bike racks on O'Connell Street, they got rid of them. Driving when they had those bike racks where they had one car and they had all the bike racks behind them to show you how many bike spaces was one car parking space. And then that whole sense of reimagining our roads, if we don't have cars on them. And just even how our footpaths are, like I walked my bike through town actually twice this week as an experiment, just to see what does it feel like to be a pedestrian. Because I was listening to a very interesting talk once, and they said everyone who drives at some point in their life will become a pedestrian once they get out of their car. Now, a pedestrian, sometimes people identify as being one type of transport user, but at some point we're all different types of transport users. We all have to walk somewhere, unless you're going to drive literally into the shop. Quite literally, you will at some point walk. So just having that feeling of our footpaths, like you look at them, some of them are a metre wide, and then you look at the road space, it's 10 metres wide. In loads of parts of town, and it just, in my head, it just blows my mind that that's still the kind of the city fabric that it is the majority of our city fabric. So do some points.
Yeah, about multimodal transport. So the main way I get around in Dublin now is bus and Lever. So I get the bus in, but when it gets to Phibsborough, it starts to slow down a lot, and then I switch to a Lever bike. It's a lot more expensive, but it's the most efficient way to do it. I might direct that question just on multimodal to Ciara.
I completely agree. I even for my multimodal challenge is usually going home to Longford. This is like there's 2 spaces on a carriage to bring a bike. If they're booked out, then you get a different train or you don't bring your bike, and then when you get home you need a lift to get to where you need to go. So for me that's the thing as well, but like you've pretty much said all the solutions. It's just like we need like all active transport infrastructure isn't just the lanes, it is where do you store your bike, is it safe, is it accessible. I did a cycle study trip in Utrecht last year, 2 years ago, and the connection between the different modes of public transport, cycling, buses, walking, everything was just incredible. Like you had, like you could park thousands of bicycles in a 3-story or a multi-story bike parking place. You could cycle through it. It was attached to the train station. So all of the solution, all of your questions are basically like, yeah, we need to take more space away from cars, or from parking, or where we store cars and drive cars, and just provide them to people who are walking, cycling, and storing bikes. It's like I don't have any grander solutions apart from we need to be better.
Just Mike, we just published a piece of research that we did with DLR, and the kind of key thing was that I think planners and people that put in submissions to these kind of cycling schemes, they see cycling as you're messing around on a bike. You're not going anywhere, and it's not transport, and that's the kind of key thing. And I think until that changes, and the planners, and I do think DLR, they're amazing, they put in great infrastructure, but until that happens and changes everywhere, it will stay the same. And I suppose the reason why the car gets the amount of space that it does is because it pays so much tax, and the reasons why we have huge concrete structures for very expensive vehicles in this city is because of the amount of money that makes. And until we change our values, or we change the financing around it, that's going to stay the same.
So plenty of questions here, but I'm going to take one from YouTube. Just how do we get Garda Síochána to improve the perception of safety on our roads by enforcing forward driving, 47 fixed charge penalties in 2 years for dangerous overtaking, which is not the new rule, but since the updated legislation of cyclists, which is quite low. Aaron, would you like to speak to that? you briefly mentioned it, so.
I make the mistake sometimes of addressing my issues to particular drivers, so I can't keep my mouth shut sometimes. But I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what to say to that, because I did. It's just more on a personal level, so I just find it kind of baffling. Even just sitting on the bus going into through North Strand on the what's the cycleway or being built at the moment, and I keep on thinking to myself, if my time is my money, this is robbery, right? Just the amount of people that are blocking up the cycleway, if these were teenagers and they were if they were acting antisocially, which we saw during say COVID, and the outrage and the like, literally almost it was shocking to see the Garda response to teenagers who were completely again, another project we worked on with youth in Dublin 1, they were completely vulnerable. Like if my child was acting like the way some children are acting, I'd be absolutely terrified for them. That's my go-to when I see when I see behaviour from teenagers acting antisocially, is just worry. But it's when drivers are behaving in a way that is intimidating, aggressive, or just taking it for granted, just belting it through the city where it's half and half, like it's if you step in my way and I kill you, well, that's the way it works. It just kind of baffles me. I'm completely confused by the guy's response to that. I'm just completely confused about how they don't see it. I have a friend who's a guard. It's not an issue. It's just not an issue.
I might hold on to that question for the minister for Christmas. Any more questions? I think Ciara here. Connor.
My question's for Brian. I was interested in what you said about the directly elected mayor, and I was thinking about like all the talks around the nighttime economy and potential for like a nightmare. I suppose from your point of view, like, are you aware of any discussions, or do you think there's a benefit in, I suppose, like a nighttime mayor taking a different approach to public and sustainable transport to kind of get people to late night leisure activities? In particular, I'm kind of thinking about the gender thing that you were talking about in terms of like safety and the fall off potentially of like certain demographics not using public transport after a certain time.
It's definitely something that's part of the discussion. I do think that we need, and I suppose it's to go to the theme, is about transport and how it can be better used. So we put the blues to bed at night. Other cities use their tram networks overnight, and I think as the TAI said that they need it for updates or maintenance. It can't be that. It can't be that for so long.
Noise pollution. You know it's noise pollution.
Yeah, there is the noise pollution thing as well, but you know, if you look at Melbourne and other cities, they allow their trams to run 24 hours.
Yeah,
so
and that's where the heart, you might be familiar with the research on the noise pollution from tram tracks. It's been proven to cause dementia, heart attacks, and that's why we can't have nighttime rail and nighttime news.
Many other cities do it.
Yeah, and they have heart attacks and dementia. And you see the study that came out of Denmark, people beside rails.
I'm going to take a question from
one of the reasons why projects will be rejected by the board.
I'm going to take a question from Ciara on the back there. Mike.
Thanks, Feljin. Thanks, guys. Just wanted to talk about the Dublin Metropolitan Area Walking and Cycling Index, which was published last year. There was one really interesting statistic in that about cycling trips. They measured the purpose, so they identified the purpose of each cycling trip, or the proportion of trips for different purposes. And only about, I think it was 36% of all trips were to do with commuting to work, college, or school. And the rest of them were recreational, leisure, social, shopping, business. So there's 2/3 of the trips that have been taking place with bicycle are not about commuting. But the infrastructure that we're designing is very much focused on commuting. And I wonder, first of all, does that percentage transfer to car use as well? If we're talking about the amount of people who are driving to, and I do it myself, to drive to GAA clubs 3-4 nights a week, weekends, going away and watches. How much of the car traffic in the city is not commuter traffic, is for those other uses as well? And is that measured? And does the transport planning, which is what your question for time, does the transport planning that's carried out by the NTA, TAI reflect that as well?
So the answer to that is yes, it would do. And I'm an academic in Trinity. I just tend to work and play with their models. But the data that they collect does collect trips outside of the commute. So nationally, about a quarter of all of our trips that we take are the commuting trip, and then about 75% are for other purposes. In Dublin and in all of the models that we have across the country, there are the inter-peak periods, there's the off-peak periods, there's weekend periods, and they model different movements around that as well. It's not as sophisticated as finding out, there's a huge percentage of extra trips that happen because, GAA grounds don't allow kids to store their kit in the GAA ground, and they could get the bus perhaps there if they didn't have to ferry it by car. So it's not that sophisticated, but they do model it, and it is something that is modelled.
Any other questions?
So just referring to the two-car driveway that your friends were talking about, or travelling in style when you rock up on the bicycle, there's obviously an aspiration in Irish culture to have a car, fancy your car for the vast majority of people. How do we as a society change our values? How do we nudge people in a direction where that isn't the aspiration? Does the panel have any thoughts on that?
Janis?
I think for me it's it's not a silver bullet, but I think for me it's definitely looking at that marketing piece I spoke about earlier, that because that normalizes, and it's having the next shiny thing and keeping up with the Joneses, and that feeds into our values and our aspirations, and we're all we all might think we're immune to marketing, but we're not, and that's why the marketers are so good at what they do. So I think we need to kind of seriously reflect and have conversations around is that the type of society we want to live in, where this is pushed at us all of the time, the next thing, and I mean it's cars, but obviously it's kind of broader kind of consumer products, and there's a wider existential conversation there, but I think that kind of marketing restriction, regulation piece, I think that needs to be on the table, given where we are now in terms of climate and health and everything. I think that absolutely, that shaping that world again, as I spoke about, I think that absolutely has to be in the mix.
Let's keep taking questions. Peter, at the front here.
My question is just about how do we counter narratives in the media? Because obviously commercial radio, say, or we've seen other broadcasters this week, have a connection with whatever it might be, car companies, or they're getting money out of it, whereas there's not a bicycle shop running ads on national radio. So say we were at a Dublin Inquirer thing recently, and they're talking about they don't take funding. So how does the panel see countering narratives that are built around the fact that, rightly or wrongly, there's a perception that media is taking money from the car industry and therefore might want to push a certain agenda when it comes to that sort of thing?
Ciara?
I think that is a hard one, because I think it's personal perception, but I actually think it might go back to marketing as well. It's just like, it is sponsorship. It's like, where you get your money from will always dictate a certain amount of editorial kind of editorial, I suppose, how stuff is presented. So if you're sponsored by cars, then obviously you're not going to be like, oh, we should all get rid of cars because you're going to lose your sponsorship. So a lot of it is sponsorship and where the money comes from this. But I also think it is like when you were saying, like, Pat Kenny was just like, I've never it's countering that. It's just like, why is that a good thing? It's just like that makes no sense. That's a ridiculous statement to make. But it's probably who we have in elevated in our media as well, and the discussions that are around it. So I don't think any of this will take a while to change. It always takes a while to change opinion and behaviour and culture. But I think it is starting to change. Like, even just from having these discussions and like even having more people cycle, even having, once you have the infrastructure, you have more people cycling, you have less of the, you have more people who are kind of I suppose pro cycling or see the benefits of cycling. So it will take time, I think, but yeah, I think it's getting there. But yeah.
I might just say something on that as well. I think that as somebody that waits to go on to a radio show a bit, and the thing you hear is either an airline or a car insurance ad or a car ad or something like that, I think I honestly don't think that they're that they're swayed by whoever's sponsoring them. I don't think. Maybe I'm just being very naive, but it's always the Punch and Judy show, and that's what they want, regardless of what station you go on to. They want somebody that is saying something, passionate and reasonable, and then they want somebody else to come on and just say, well, what you're saying is rubbish, and electric cars are killing people, and we need to drive everywhere with a petrol or diesel car. So it's that Punch and Judy show. How we consume our media, I think, is the bigger problem, as opposed to who's sponsoring it.
Ellen there.
Hi, I'm Ellen from the Dublin Cycling Campaign. I started an experiment with my husband 14 years ago. It was called How to Have 4 Kids and Not Have a Car. And people actually laughed in our face when we said I was going to get the train to Wexford with the 4 kids. 14 years later, we've done it. And we live in an area that's an LTN, a rare thing in Dublin. We live in an area where a bollard was put in and the traffic was blocked off. And we live in we have public transport at 2 ends of the road, we have a train station down the road, yet all my neighbours drive. They did a survey over the States, like 70% of my neighbours drive. When is there going to be an appetite to actually actively disincentivise people to drive? Because people in our estate, it's all there laid out, and people still drive, and people say they have to drive, and I can go, you absolutely don't, we're living the life. Is there ever going to be an appetite in the political class to actually charge people? The only thing I can see is when electric cars become mainstream and tax on petrol is gone, they're going to need a revenue source and maybe road pricing. But can anyone see an incentive or an appetite for them to grasp that nettle?
I'm told that there are plans to reduce cars in the city centre coming in a few months, so we'll see. Would any of the panellists like to speak to that?
I can talk to that. Around the congestion charge, yeah, probably at some point it may be necessary. But I think, one of the key things, and there was a News Talk survey there that I spoke about the other day on the Hard Shoulder, and they said if public transport was good enough, but what's good enough? And that's the key thing. And I think good enough is very different for all up and down your road, let alone across the country. So it's trying to figure that out. It's trying to get the metric of, you can get it to 80% of this city in 30 minutes. And then once we achieve that, then, if people still aren't switching over and we've spent billions of euro, then that is something that's gonna have to happen. But when we have all this public transport in place, there's going to be very little road space left for private cars.
Good enough for a lot of people is a metro from their front door to
exactly.
It's something that I hear on Twitter every time. Every time I post anything, it's like, well, we don't have a metro yet, so we can't do that. They're very different.
Answer the question to why we don't have it.
We can come back to that.
We don't have the population density to make it economically viable.
Lauren, you have the mic there. Could you go ahead?
I just wanted to ask about public consultation. It's come up a little bit, but I think the lion's share of the work that we do at Dublin Commuter Coalition is filling out these long public consultation forms. We've done Bus Connects, every single application has gone into Onboard Panola, Dark Plus, Metro. It's just constant. And I'm aware that we're a committee of a certain demographic, and we try to think about what it's like for the child who's going to be crossing the street at the various points, and we kind of have a formula for how we do it, and often we just say things like, just follow the mandatory standards, because they don't still. And I was wondering, with you have such interesting communities that you're coming from, and are you getting engaged in those processes? Because I would absolutely love to have a 5-year-old talking about, the design of the dart and where do you put your scooter and how do you get across the road, and I'd love for Trinity students to be advocating for this as well. And also, we saw that poster recently of like the no bus gate for the church, or the bus gate would destroy the church, and the Heart Foundation. So if you could talk a little bit about how you're responding to public consultations.
Janis, you were so signed up to do one of our Bus Connects ones.
Once you go on the committee, you never really step off that. I think that from an Irish Heart Foundation perspective, we're fortunate to be resourced to have an advocacy team, and we advocate in terms of patient services, and as well as kind of the environmental, I don't mean environmental as in green, but I suppose the food policy, activity policy, etc. as well. So we're fortunate to, and I suppose try and harness the kind of patient voice in that. So earlier this week we launched research with heart failure patients around the challenges they face in their kind of daily lives, and we haven't had the resources yet to be able to do kind of the cost of living issues in terms of being a patient, but that's something we'd love to do. But certainly 74% of the heart failure patients were saying that post-diagnosis, their cost of living, went up, and that included kind of extra transport costs, because obviously more appointments, having to go into hospital, and something we haven't really talked about this evening yet is, people travel for healthcare reasons as well, and obviously you've got emergency and people need to go, in an ambulance or be driven in a car, but a lot of healthcare engagement is, it's a scheduled appointment, it's an outpatient appointment, and the HSE is the largest employer in the state, and thankfully they've just launched their climate plan. So sorry, I've slightly gone off topic in terms of your question, but I think including that kind of patient voice and elevating the voice of young people is something that's it's part of our values and how we work. Do we do enough of it? No. Could we do more? Absolutely. And I think the more that we listen to the reality, what you were saying, Aaron, in terms of the reality of people's lives on the ground, and I think that adds such legitimacy when you are a national organisation, that it's not just we're the Heart Foundation and we know what you need, but it's the credibility piece of really listening, understanding, taking the time to hear people, reflect it back. Have we actually interpreted this correctly or not? We spend a lot of time with our schools working in doing that and really, ensuring that we've got it right. So I'd say, we're doing some, but a lot more to do, to use that phrase.
Aaron, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things with a lot of the consultation UX, or the interface that you can actually that are being sent out, it really excludes an awful lot of people, and depending on the age of the child, so you've got different verbal abilities, different cognitive abilities in relation to that too. So that's always an issue I have with a lot of the consultations. It's consultation provided, but is it sufficient to meet the needs of the people that are supposedly being whose environment is going to be changed significantly? I think one of the things, again, just I kind of speak to what I know, I guess, but one of the things that we're working on with Fingal at the moment is the Play Streets pilot initiative that we're running. So the idea is that communities will go to the council, who will have a team that essentially will look after the advertising and the notices for the road closure, will look after the funding, will look after all the logistics, so that the community just need to basically present themselves for that. And then so after that, then we're looking at well, how is that put into legislation? And so looking at how do you actually take the Roads Act, how do you take that section 75 of road closures, and actually how do you enable, it's probably the wrong word, but how do you support communities that want to use their public space in their own neighbourhoods as places to socialise and play, and not just throughways, and so that have that statutory backing, that have that legislative backing to close the road. Because at the moment, unless you're going to pay a few €1,000 in Dublin, or unless you're going to have a Garda close the road for you, it's not going to happen. So I guess there's kind of, back to your point in terms of consultation, one is it fit for purpose in terms of who you're consulting with? Are you actually thinking about hard to reach communities? One of the things about online consultations, elderly people don't use online consultation forms. In terms of my experience, it really doesn't reach a huge amount in terms of those kind of the two kind of ends of the platform. To take the other organisation that works with children, the 8 to 80s, those two sides. So it's often parents speaking on behalf of their children, which is always the case, I guess. But I think that the thing is that you enable communities through the legislative framework for consultations, and that the consultation thinks of the language it's using, thinks of the interface it's using, and that's kind of where we kind of really push on pilot interventions that are short term, like 1 day, few hours, and that's the consultation. It's how do children use the space when there's no cars on it, and then you're observing how they're using it, and that's a consultation. And then you feed that back to the community, saying this is what we've seen, this is what you felt. So a lot of our language is around emotional interaction with space, as opposed to verbal, like defining something that they've never even thought about for the first time. Like, we think about these things, That's our kind of nerdy passion. I think about wait times at lights. I think about curb drops. I look at tactile paving. I literally take pictures of gender representation of school signs when I travel. My wife took a picture of a sign the other day at a concert. It was a big day for me. She started to take signage pictures. But I guess that's the kind of thing is the consultation format fit for purpose at the moment? I'm not sure if it is. It's an obligation, but is it really?
It's very Chinese at the moment.
Okay. I don't know what that means.
They made your decision.
Oh, okay.
They let you make a few comments, but the decision has been made, and that's what we're getting with Bus Connects at the moment. And that's probably why it's going to be rejected by an board.
So we've got basically 4 minutes left until the end, so I'm going to take one more question. But on that, I remember the TikTok trend a couple of months ago about, people stealing your photos and threatening to share them, and all the pictures, just pictures of footpaths and illegally parked cars. For me, it's tactile paving, stop signs and stuff like that. Yeah. So any other questions? Oh, got one there.
Thanks, Declan. I'd like to ask a question on one thing that was mentioned, the directly elected Dublin mayor, which I guess would create a new political dynamic on a lot of these issues. Just a question there in terms of does a lot of other work need to happen with that? Because I think the powers that local governments have in Ireland are relatively weak compared to other countries where you mentioned that you have directly elected mayors. So in terms of the powers that person would have vis-a-vis transportation agencies, competent bodies, and what you would hand over to the authority generally, is there a large body of work that needs to be done on that? And then just very quickly, if I might indulge your patience, I think we talked a lot here about this idea, the culture of across generations. It's aspirational to have a car. Once people get into the car, they never ever go back. I think for a sustainable transport system, you need to have a system that obviously works for people at every single stage in their life. And it's been interesting to hear people talk about their youth and now as parents trying to get their experiences there. In terms of getting at the demographic who haven't used transport in a long time, who have in their own eyes graduated to using a car, what's a structural change? Because I feel like the narrative media thing might be lost and irretrievable. If you had the power there in terms of a single structural change to get those people back even once on a public transport journey, what would it be?
Do you want me to answer the mayor? I'll do that first then. So there was a citizens' assembly on this. I spoke at it about the powers that a directly elected mayor should have in transport. I would argue probably not much more than the mayor, or not much more than Dublin City Council currently have. They just don't really use the powers in the way that they could. I think that the City Council could be doing a lot more innovative things in terms of how they design our street space, how they pilot things. In Scotland, they've got these new temporary traffic orders. If they've got an idea about a bus gate or something like that, they do it, put it in for 18 months, evaluate it. If it works, it stays. If it doesn't, it goes. So that kind of more agile thing, but then also that he or she will be, have the mandate of the people to be able to go and say, taking out all the car parking spaces or putting in more, depending whatever way the election goes. The second part of the question was about what?
Getting the older generation out and use transport a while back on.
People that haven't used, I think when you change jobs, I think that's something that we could do. There's a really cool program, I think it's in the north of England, where people that were in long-term unemployed, one of the reasons they weren't getting employment was because they felt they needed a car to get to their place of work. And what the employers did in conjunction with the local authority was give them free public transport to get to their employer, and that they would have this 6-month ticket to get to their place of work, because that was the big barrier.
I'm going to wrap it up now, but do people have any final things to say? I believe, Ciara, you have a book out. Brian, do you have a paper?
I've spoken enough.
So myself and my boss have published a book called Parishes Oasis, kind of looking at how parishes can take action locally within their communities, and getting on your bikes is one of the chapters. So thank you.
Any funding opportunities, Brian?
Yeah, the next speaker could tell you more about those.
We just launched a program with Lego Foundation yesterday, and so we're able to offer anybody who would like to run a Playful street €500 in terms of play equipment, as in goals and footballs and things like that. So if you'd like, just go to Changeouts and Playful Streets, and so I'm delighted with that.
I might just flag the Climate and Health Alliance was established by the Irish Heart Foundation to kind of bring the voices of health into the climate agenda. So if anybody is in an organisation that kind of fits the bill, like, we're always kind of open to members. We just had Bohemians Football Club just joined very recently. So, again, that point around diversity of voices. So I'd encourage you to check it out and join if you feel it's appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah, so I remember looking at the list before, and it was all kind of health organisations. Then I saw Bo's joined, so sports, fitness. It's a broad church, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you to our panellists. We're going to take a short break. And we'll come back with the session with Mr. Ryan.
So thanks, everyone. Is this, yeah, it's working, okay. So thanks very much, everyone, for being here. And I'd like to welcome Minister Eamon Ryan to talk to us today about public transport for leisure and transport in general for leisure. And we'll have a Q&A session, but maybe just to start off, if you wouldn't mind, to talk a little bit about transport for leisure in your experience, and what changes you're hoping to make in terms of transport for leisure. For example, in the Commuter Coalition, we recently suggested that there should be bus routes to the Wicklow Mountains that are easily accessible. They don't exist now, and the NTA came back and said, well, we don't have the resources to enable bus routes to the Wicklow Mountains. So I guess I'm wondering what is being planned in terms of transport for leisure.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Does that sound a bit strange?
Yeah, a little, yeah.
It's not me. You asked about my experience. I'm ancient. I'm so old. I can remember Dublin in the 60s. And it's cliched, but that's what I grew up with. I grew up in suburban streets where you played on streets. That was really interesting earlier on about the playing on the streets, but that was like wholesale, normal, you had nothing else to do. We were bored silly. And there was no one ever did anything. So maybe that was part of it. And there were so many kids that we outnumbered parents that you couldn't be controlled anyway. But it was a defining thing for me growing up in Dublin. I played on the streets right through until my late teens. I'll give another example. My cousins came back from, they were away, but they were staying in Crumlin. And they were going to school in Loretta on the Green. My cousin was going to school. And she was 4 at the time. She used to get the bus from, I think she had to get 2 buses from Crumlin to school. She was 4. But it was okay because her brother was with her. He was 6. And they went on their own. And there was loads of downsides about that time in Dublin. There was loads of, bad things that we now look back in hindsight. I could go on about that. But there was great freedom and great sense of community and sense of local place because it wasn't dominated by cars. And over the intervening 50 years, it's been dominated by cars. As the OECD, there was a big OECD report done last year about sustainable mobility, commissioned by the Climate Change Advisory Council, and they said that by design we had developed a car-based system. We'd gone to 70% of all trips by car, and it was by design, and it was. And I suppose I personally was at a certain point in the late 80s, I got involved in the Green Party. In the early 90s, got involved in the Dublin cycling campaign, and have been pretty much campaigning since then that we need to change to a different direction, sustainable mobility. And my poor wife, I was listening to Ellen in the 4 Kids Without a Car Club, with you, sister. And actually, do you know what, it was better? Because you weren't rushing anywhere anyway with 4 kids. It was part of the experience. was actually getting on the bus together, and time wasn't so urgent as a commodity in that, because you're with your kids, you're having a good time. So, but I kept saying to my wife, I was involved, as I said, in the cycling campaign, and then I became a councillor, and now then a TD, and right through that whole time, she was sick and tired of me saying, you mark my words, Dublin's changing. And I'll say here tonight, you mark my words, Dublin's about to change. And I think it is. I think it has to. I think it's deeply frustrating as how slow it is, but it's essential, it's inevitable. It won't work on a car-based system. The maths, whatever about the climate, the physical geometry of how many cars can you get onto our streets, and also I think there is a change. I think the broad political system, there are pockets of opposition and it's not certain, but I do think, if I look at what's reality where we are, and so I'll finish on this, I can speak on this all night. In Dublin, we have the metro ready to go. It's in planning. We have to get it out. We have Dart Plus, Dart West, Dart Southwest, Dart Coastal, all ready to go, all in planning. In the sense that we've done all the business case, we know exactly what we want to do. If we get it through Panellists, it'll happen. We have the 6 of the Bus Connects projects, and the other 4 all in planning, in Panellists, ready to go. And a wider other projects that could keep going on. But so some of the basic infrastructure we need is ready to go, subject to getting through planning. And that will be transformative. Bus Connects will be transformative, because the likes of the bus gate, you can take my own area, go local, when you put a bus gate inside in Rathmines, and I know that parish priest in Rathmines Church, and I love Rathmines Church, but I think it'll be benefit from having a bus gate outside the church. I think it'll create a quieter, safer, more sacred space, if I could put it that way, outside the church. Same in Kimmage, same in a lot of those projects. What it will be transformative, not just getting the bus through, but also changing the sense of what the city, how the city works, and so it is about to change. Now, we got to be faster. We got to be really careful, because I have a fear for our city that post-COVID, people now commuting 2 days a week rather than 5, you could see a hollowing out of the city. Like, you could see, what I get a sense from a distance, San Francisco's going, in terms of, the city not being really living. So we have to be careful, and we have to bring people back into the living in the city. It's not just about the transport system, it's about the housing as well. But I think the creation of an attractive realm for walking and cycling and public transport and sense of community is really important in also bringing people back in to live to the centre, because it's got to be a nice place to live, and car-dominated streets are not nice places to live.
Absolutely, I agree. In terms of access for all for leisure, we know that a lot of the DART stations, for example, their lifts don't work, or some of the new stations are being planned and they have extremely long ramps that people will have to take. What is being done to sort of make sure that all people can access the transit system that is being built and that exists now?
There has been a real problem around access, particularly in the railway stations, and we have sought to really fix that, make sure that every lift and all the access facilities are available. Can I just maybe to go slightly broader as well as disability? Well, first on disability, as I said, I was very lucky. I was involved in the Dublin Cycling Campaign, and through that I was involved in the Dublin Transportation Advisory Committee back in the early 90s, mid-90s. And there was a brilliant engineer in my mind at that time, John Henry. He was the director of the Dublin Transportation Office. And he made a really consistent, he was an engineer and consistently made the point, which is true, that when you design for accessibility, for disability accessibility, you design better for all. An example, you know this, Ellen, 4 kids and a buggy ain't easy on access, or 2 buggies ain't easy with accessibility. So they benefit from that. And so many people don't have access to the car. You could be too old, or for whatever medical reason can't drive. And the other one, and I saw Janet Horn is here. Janet, I remember you're city councillor. I remember I was city councillor back in the late 90s. And I remember some simple dawning realisation in the city council at the time. It hasn't changed that much, but at that time, some 50% of the households in Dublin City didn't own a car. But all of our budget and most of our attention was on the 50% who did. And that's an accessibility issue. I think it's I think it's a big environmental issue, but I also think it's a social justice issue. That when you design accessibility for all, you tend then towards walking and cycling and public transport, because you don't have to afford, the 20, 30, whatever thousand to buy that accessibility. And so this is a social justice issue. This is, in my mind, the core of social justice, because when you design it around an atomised individual system, what you get an atomised individualistic market knows best system. When you design around public transport and accessibility for all, I think it changes the psychology in so many ways.
Okay, one more question from me, and then I'll open up to the floor. Speaking to access for all, in terms of prams on the footpaths, for example, we know that the enforcement of the existing laws around travel are non-existent. So cars are constantly parked on the footpaths, cars are constantly parked in the cycle lanes, cars are constantly parked in the bus lanes, but very little is being done about this. What is going to change to make something be done about this?
It is a real issue, and it goes back to that accessibility issue. My colleague Nasa Horkin is a TD, but she also, as a parent of a child who has some needs that access capability, was always pointing out the blatant unfairness and the lack of policing of it. It is a policing issue. There is a question in my mind, should we, the city council, have further, should we go back to traffic wardens or actually a local policing? That's one thing I think we should, is one way that we could approach this, because An Garda Síochána are stretched, and do they have the resources to police it properly? Probably not, and we do have to look in terms of how we resource it. I often think, though, it's also about, it's about what's culturally acceptable, I think, and I'd include that, I'm a cyclist. I think even for ourselves, rather than getting into the wars of where everyone's videoing each other on phones in terms of what are you doing, I think I think part of the dysfunctional and outlaw type system we have is because of the dysfunctional, chaotic traffic system we have. I think if we will do this, when you reallocate space to create a safer space for walking, safer space for cycling, better public transport, and the role of the car. It's not that you're anti-car or anti the person in the car. That going down that road, in my mind, is just going to get more and more divisive. It just doesn't. Where does it get you? If you start, though, getting the design of the street right and clear design principles in terms of what's the purpose of the street, is it to play on? Is it to shop on? Is it to get somewhere, or is it local vision or a sense of local place? When you start designing, being clear on what streets are and so on, then you don't get as much of those confrontational arrangements. And I think then you also get a culture of respect from everyone. And me as a cyclist, have to think about that too. So I'm not scaring a pedestrian the way I cycle, and even with cyclist to cyclist, I'm terrified increasingly as I get old of people whizzing by me within 2 inches. It's not just cars. And same for someone who's maybe has disability access or other issues in terms of someone parking on the space or whatever different behaviour. I think we have to be careful not to turn it into a culture war. We need to change the culture, not through war, but through reorganising space in a clever way.
Great, thank you. Questions from the audience? Sure.
I think everyone in this room can say that we're excited about Metrolink, and of course we appreciate that it's in the planning system. I appreciate it myself. I work in planning, so I know how long these things take. But when we think about something like capacity building, it's founded on constant innovation and constant work. Why are we not considering moving to the next big project, the next metro link, the next metro line, and so forth?
I said earlier I was involved in the Dublin Transportation Office. I was there representing the cycling campaign from 93 or 4, I think it was, up to 2002. And I remember I was involved at the time. We did the Dublin Transportation Office did, I call it we, did the Platform for Change, which was a transport plan for Dublin. And I think it was a really good piece of work. It was based on really good planning data. It was really scientific in terms of there was a criteria we were looking, the sort of organised thing I've just been talking about, that it would be a mesh network across the city. You would always be within a certain distance access to a regular public transport system, and it was all based on demographic projections and really a good analysis of what was happening in the city and what could and should happen. The metro was the number one project, not because it was the only one that mattered, but that it did give a high quality spine, high capacity spine through the north-south. It did open up development lands in the north, and it did also have to ultimately connect onto the south side, now most likely to the southwest. Then, well, actually it started off going to the southwest under that modelling thing, and that's probably where it's likely to go back to. And it's an important project. There isn't as much the development lands I'd like on the north side to the certain extent. I was looking recently, I went into Nama to see, let's rubbing my hands thinking here we go, and there's not enough hectares. There is a lot of development potential, but not as much as I had hoped. But it's still the right project in my mind. And everything I remember we did the Lewis out to Dundrum, and the whoa and the oh my God, this is ridiculous, you haven't a clue, this is never going to work. As soon as the Lewis opened, it delivered exactly what the modelling projections had said it would deliver, even through a very low density, like trust me, Churchdown is as low density as you can get. It delivered exactly what was projected, and I think the metro will do the same. And it's not like transformative in terms of it's not an Elizabeth line, it's an important line, but it's still going to work and will get through the Cúna Day planning in a way that needs to be built quick. But it's not the only project. I mentioned there the DART Plus, like that actually is a tripling, I'm going on memory here now, tripling of the quantity of DART passengers. So it's a tripling of our DART capacity, and it's really attractive because it's not just, it's going to be extended to the likes of Wicklow, extend on the north side up to Balbriggan and beyond, and those new Lewis battery, new Alstom battery electric trains are zero carbon. That's a key project. I think Bus Connects is also a key project. Like Bus Connects has to be built quickly. It's with deep frustration that in my mind, it's taking 10 years to build the bus network. It will take 10 years from start, conception, 2017, delivery 2027 if we're lucky. And I know a lot of people have been concerned about Bus Connects, but I think there's an example where public consultation has worked. It started off as a corridors mentality type project, and it turned, not as much as maybe some would like, but certainly much better in terms of being careful of the communities it passes through, and it's critical. We will also need other projects. We will need, in time, in the long run, a rail interconnection between Spencer Dock area and Euston Station. That's a project that's always stacked up. We will need an Avon rail line. I could go on, there are other projects. But we also need, we have to be careful here. We need Cork Metropolitan Rail, we need Limerick Metropolitan Rail, we need Galway cross-city bus connection, could be transferred into Lewis eventually, and we need Waterford has the real potential to turn into a sustainable city if we get the transport system right. And if everything's in Dublin, it won't be good for Dublin, because Dublin will just get overcrowded and property prices go through the roof. My kids can't live in the city I grew up in. So we do have to be careful. Like, there's only a certain pot. The National Development Plan is not small. It was 35 billion euros. But the truth is, and this was 2.5 to 3 years ago, we had 70 billion euros of projects in development before you even look at some of the new and additional projects. And I might talk about some of them later. And that was before inflation kicked in, so it's probably about 120 billion now. So yes, we have to build the metro. Yes, we have to build bus connects. Yes, we have to build DART Plus. More than anything else, we have to build an active travel network for this city, because that's the best return, and I think could make the biggest difference and the biggest change. And that actually needs to come before the bus connects comes in the next 3 years, in my mind. But so any other additional infrastructure, yes, and the rail review, the All Ireland Rail Review, which will be published next month, will have some of those projects and some of that sort of thinking, and yes, we need to deliver it. But I'll be perfectly honest, I think the first priority will be building some of the rail public transport systems we need in Cork, Galway, Waterford, Limerick, and to open up our ports, to put a rail line into Dublin Port rather than a new motorway road, and to transform the rail freight haulage system. So there's so many things to be done. There's a limited financial capacity. We will have to spend more than 35 billion, but it's not a limitless pot. And you have to balance Dublin with the other cities and with rural transport.
Great. Other question? Over here.
You know me. I'm Janis, I'm the councillor for this area. But I guess one thing I wanted to note is we are in the only constituency in the entire country now that is still the majority of people here don't own cars, or the majority of households here. Every other constituency in the country, as far as I know at this stage, the majority of households do own cars. So at least that's according to the 2016 census. We will get an update now, but that also reflects the fact that this is a constituency where we have a very high number of first-generation immigrant households, where people, for a variety of reasons, don't have access to cars or don't have access to the means to own them. We've got a very high proportion of marginalised households as well, where people can't afford them. So I think that social justice point should be much stronger in this constituency, but I will also say at the same time that is not something that people resonates with people, and certainly as a representative for this area, I'm still consistently been told that it is in the interest of the residents of this community as we define them, because they tend to be the voters, tend to be the car households, that we kind of preserve car access and car ownership. And I think that message of that social justice thing still hasn't quite got through, I think, in my opinion, and certainly in this constituency. I feel despite the demographics, we don't quite see that picture very clearly. I think the two things I wanted to just pick up on is the pace of rollout. So if we go down to the end of Summerhill here, you will find a pedestrian crossing that had been put in February, having been asked for about 15 years. I think that's been requested for, has been promised for 2, started rollout in February, is still not fully in place. So we have such a slow of the most basic infrastructure. So I guess, and this is, if I had the answers, I'd be doing it, and if you had the answers, I think you'd be doing it. But like, why? How do we overcome that? How do we do better with the pace of rollout? And the second thing, sorry, and I'm going on now, but is just the issues for women are a particular interest area for me. That women have a disproportionate feeling of car dependency and quite limited as a result of that. Caregiving needs, a whole range of different things come into the picture there, and there was that very good TFI report there, I think it was 2 years ago, on the travelling in women's shoes. And like, what steps should we be looking for in order to support women using public transport, active travel, sustainable transport more?
Can I make 3 points in response to Janet? Firstly, on the car, as Commuter said, we should not turn it into kind of anti-car one way or the other, but the point you make is a valid one. There's a social justice issue. But one of the other ways I think, one of the other things we are doing, which will be delivered, there was an example in Finglas where the City Council gave some land to a e-mobility hub, which had an e-bike charging station and sharing, e-car charging and sharing, and that, for particularly city areas, is a really attractive option to give people, because people do need, like, there is benefits and real gains in terms of sometimes having car access, and But that model, and we're going through the business case at the moment. It'll be funded through the Climate Action Fund. It will deliver, the first phase will be Dublin orientated, but 40 locations we're looking at. And if it works in Dublin, we'll also spread it across the other cities and towns around the country. But the really attractive thing about that is it gives everyone access, but not at the huge cost, because most people cars parked 95% of the time. Therefore, if you can get access to car sharing, it gives all the benefits without having some of the costs or some of the inconvenience. And particularly in city areas where parking, where charging is going to be difficult, I think that is a really interesting project, which Dublin City have done 1, and now we need to replicate and do 40 in the next 2 to 3 years. On the second issue about speed, and this is a real frustration for me, because we also have seen that you can do things quickly. COVID was, I know it's a cliche, I know it's trotted out all the time, but it deserves to be what David Byrne did in Dunleary with the Black Rock to Sandy Cove, done in record time, low budget. It shows what can be done. We have a real problem in transport in meeting our climate targets. We have a legal obligation under climate law to deliver a significant reduction by 2025. To do that, we've established 35 Pathfinder projects. We set up a Sustainable Mobility Task Force. It pulls together, trying to learn from what worked in COVID. Departments work together with agencies, not in silos. And there are 35 examples of work that we want delivered by 2025, the end of 2025. We've delivered about 5 or 6 of them already: Athlone Town Bus Service, pedestrian bridge across the same town, Waterford new sustainable mobility bridge we're building across the shore, smart work travel programme for employees. In Dublin, the key project in my mind is it's called a 5 Cities Mobility Plan, but it is a reallocation of road space project for safer pedestrian cycling and improved bus access. And it's already happening out in Tala, Tymon Park. South Dublin have done some good work. They're kind of at their first phase. But for me, the really key one is the city centre. And I've listened and heard what you said about the likes of Summerhill, Gardiner Street. Take Gardiner Street, Beresford Place. Stunningly beautiful 17th and 18th century architectural jewel turned into a gyratory one-way traffic roundabout. And Gardiner Street is a stunning street, but turned into a distributor road, 4 lanes, going where, how fast, why? And Summerhill the same. And the reason I just picked those, because none of those routes, correct me if I'm wrong here now, are in the Bus Connects network. We do have an issue. We've got Bus Connects in the middle of planning, so we're not, we want to get it through planning. The Borpanola have said they will do that, so let them do that. But the city centre has not been part of the Bus Connects planning application system, so I think it's the area where we can go with a fast, rapid, Ruda Rivoli type intervention to try and make the city work. And work for everyone. It's not like kind of punitive in any way. The current system is not working. And I think, yes, there was a certain start in that in College Green there 2 months ago, but actually that's only a small part of it. In my mind, it has to be really further, an integrated look at the quays, this one-way gyratory system, Pearse Street, Tower Street, that whole kind of city centre as a motorway distributor network for commuting, which is what it was designed for back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I think that project is going to be really key. It's going to be very politically difficult because it's going to have to be brave. It was due in June, as you know, and I'm told now it's going to be September. I'm looking to meet both the council and the NTA who are working together on it to see, let's get it right. The advantage is we can't always change, these are low, fast intervention measures, so that it's road space reallocation rather than, we're not going to price people off the roads, in my mind. Other people might have different views, but I don't. Brian, we did the modelling on that to meet the climate targets. It required a 600% increase in the cost of petrol and diesel. It's not going to happen. So road space reallocation is, and the advantage of road space, well, firstly, a 600% increase in someone who is on a lower income, that's not fair. And secondly, it would take too long because the inelasticity of demand that we have. So far better to do experimental traffic orders, Section 38 and other measures that do exist within the planning law. We've further given capability for that in the road traffic bill, which has just gone through, and the regulations which we're issuing on the existing act. And I think that needs to be done quickly. And I think to a certain extent it's the time to have a question about the city, to say, could we do Rue de Rivoli? Could we kind of really go for it? And London is doing this, Paris is doing this, we wouldn't be out of sync. But I think we're best to go brave and go big on that. And I think do it with the low cost. And I could go on about other examples of the Pathfinder projects, but Dublin City I think is a critical one because going back to what I was saying, the Dublin City didn't have a great COVID, particularly the south side inner city. Like, it was hollowed out a wee bit, and we need to get it back, life back. And I can't see a better way of doing that than getting our bus system, getting walking and cycling really working. Then lastly, just on your issue, that report was a really good one, travelling in a woman's shoes. And I did come back to a thing earlier about how you design an orderly culture type way. I mean, this is difficult because you're down to very site specific, each street and each bus stop, each station. But I do think it's the level of design at that level around lighting, around, for me, it's having as many people as possible on the street that actually in some ways actually enhances security rather than retracts from it. So you're not, it's when you're isolated and it's quieter, then I think there are more risks. But I think that's part of that cultural design thing I was talking about earlier on, and it's street by street. And that's where councillors, our councillors, what I said there about the city centre, the Pathfinder projects, the one caveat is it has to be supported by the local council. You can't impose this top-down Dublin saying they know best. It has to be the city council and it has to be this city council, not the next one. My own sense of interest to get yours is I think the city council is currently configured would be willing to support a brave city centre traffic intervention. Now, if I'm wrong, then that's the issue for the next local election in my mind. But I think we should put it to the council in the autumn.
Great, thanks.
Any questions over here?
Thank you. Professor Bryan, in answering this gentleman's question earlier, spoke about work being a large anchor at workplaces in driving people to own cars. With that in mind, and as the state is the largest employer in the country, are there any thoughts on a cartonistic approach, facilitating workplace parking, VIK? I suppose that's one question. And the second question is, there's a lot of people here who are advocating for sustainable transport, and listening to your story and reading about it in the past, you've also been at this a long time. Do you have any thoughts on resilience? Because I do know that a lot of people drop off with the slow pace of progress. Just if you had any thoughts on the human element of the advocacy.
So we know to meet our climate targets, and climate is driving things because it should, because we have a crisis. And we need to act fast, and transport is 20% of our emissions, and anyway, there are also lots of co-benefits, but we can't ignore it. And to meet the climate targets, we know we have to avoid, shift and improve. We have to get a 20% reduction in the amount of kilometres driven. We need to shift public transport, walking, cycling, 50% of all trips at least. I think we'll surprise ourselves when we create a safe space for walking and cycling particularly. I think we'll bust through what the modelling, I don't quite trust the modelling on some of the cycling, safe to say. I think they're not picking up on the huge disincentive, because the threat you're under every day on a bike in this city, and once we get remove that threat, I think it'll explode. But anyway, at least 50%, so that's the shift. And then improve, yes, we will move to electric vehicles. They're better cars, they're cleaner, they're more efficient, they can use their own power, and as well as all the other technological developments we need to make. But the avoid one, the first one, as I said, I don't think we'll achieve it by pricing people off the road, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I think it is about road space reallocation, but it's also about demand management, and that includes car parking. And yes, I think the public service is centre stage because, well, firstly in the city centre, public service is one of the biggest employers, but also we have to lead by example. The exact mechanism for that is due in a policy, I'm going to memory here now, by the end of the year, certainly at the latest early next year. And I think it does include issues such as parking. And it isn't just office city centre, like there is questions around, are we creating a city where we've all these large out-of-town retail retail outlets, and if we completely throttled the city centre, are we just going to further accelerate a donut type effect? So we have to be careful. But absolutely, I think a part of it is going to be the change. And the other reason it's going to change is, the truth is, most offices I go to now ask the question, how many days a week are people coming in? And the answer is 2. Now that might go up to 3, I don't know, but it's not going back to 5. And in a 2 or 3 day a week commuting world, where we're going to put in the infrastructure to make the buses work better and improve, do those sort of rail projects I mentioned, Dart Plus, Metro and so on, I think people will commute the 2 days a week by public transport or cycling or walking much more easily than having to make that a 5 day a week choice. But so parking is part of it, and the detail will come at the end of this year.
And the resilience.
Oh, sorry, resilience. Stubbornness. Stubbornness and,
Jason
optimism.
Sure, yeah, great.
So we talk a lot about numbers of kilometres and how much people drive, but what they drive in is also extremely important. And there seems to be very worrying trends in the size of cars, helped by the fact that electric cars tend to be much heavier, and also in popularity trends in terms of SUVs. So what can we do to prevent this proliferation of much larger, heavier, more dangerous cars?
There is some analysis being done looking at that issue. We have done a lot in terms of the last 3 budgets, or if you look at this government, the changes to VRT was not insignificant. Like there was really, it was a several thousand, up to 7,000 or 8,000 euro increased charge on the higher emissions vehicles, which are by definition tend to be the bigger vehicles, and counterbalancing on the lighter, smaller, cleaner. That hasn't seen a quantum change. Oh, sorry, it has. I'm sure it's had some behavioural differences, but it's true. Half the cars are still now SUVs. Typically, I suppose I can't remember the name of the word for it. The kind of slightly lighter, smaller, but still SUV type cars. We look at that again in terms of ongoing. I mean, I do think tax is the better way of doing it. And I said part of the research that's been done is looking at weight-based rather than emission size, so perhaps there will be some development in that regard. But I keep going back to, in all that, I think the biggest, fastest, best way of changing things is to reallocate road space so that the bus is really effective. And then we are about to see, I mean, there will be coming a generation of EVs which are smaller, lighter, cheaper, and it'll be interesting to see if that changes the culture. It's a tricky one, and I agree with, I was listening earlier on everything that was said about the advertising, marketing, aspirational aspects of freedom in a big tank is a very hard thing because people instinctively do like. I think there's a Steineresque thing almost in it. You're in your own cocoon, and the bigger the cocoon, the nicer. It is tricky.
Hi Minister, my name is Peter Browningham. I'm with South East on Track, but I know we're not talking about that today, but it was good to hear Waterford being mentioned in the South East, that connection between Wexford and Waterford. But in a Dublin context, just thinking of things like Dunwell Avenue, Dart, South, Coastal, like we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years that in, let's face it, more affluent areas, when we try and reallocate space, or if we try and permanently close rail gates so that they would never reopen, that they don't have to move them down, that they're just permanently closed, or if we try and turn the Green Line, which connects the secondary school that you went to with the secondary school that I went to, if we try and turn it into heavy rail, there's a huge move against it. I appreciate that people have rights in terms of their houses and all the rest of it. But where's the dividing line between saying, I don't know, there's a greater good versus people's right to protest against things happening in their area, which are going to serve people maybe outside of their area because you might be just travelling through on a train or whatever it might be.
You've taken two things I'm particularly interested in, so you don't mind just give a few minutes to respond. The first one, South East on Track. We're about to publish the Rail Review. In my mind, there are 2 or 3 key elements in it. One would be connection to Northwest. Donegal has been cut off. There's a really interesting, innovative proposal to go from Portadown, Dungannon, Strabane, Omagh, Strabane, up Letterkenny, as well as Derry. But there's also another project that I think is fundamentally important. The question is, do we abandon the rail line from Ballina down to Galway, down to Limerick, down to Waterford and Wexford? Because the section from Waterford to Limerick at the moment is effectively not used. It's almost, the timetable is an oddity. If we build the section from Athenry to Claremorris, and if we build the section from Rosslare to Waterford, I think we can deliver a transformative project for the country. Because if you look at where our industry is, a lot of our industry is up in the Mayo, Allergan, Bausch and Lomb, or Baxter, all the big biomedical in Galway, all the Johnson & Johnson in Limerick, all the farm in Cork and food, all in that big swathe, western part of the country. Those companies have to have a low carbon haulage solution. And currently what a lot of them are doing, the goods from this country, the exporting, are either driven to Dublin or they're driven to Rosslare through Tipperary town or through all those towns in the southeast, and causing huge disruption and not sustainable. If we build the section from Wexford to Waterford and introduce what they're introducing in France, these new LOR trains, it's a French company based in Strasbourg. They have these new trains that you can pivot the rail carriage container. You can drive using a stevedore, a roll-on, roll-off rail trade carriage onto that and click it back in, and then you move it on to the next marshalling yard, you click it back off, and you overcome there some of the difficulties that exist with intermodal rail freight systems. And that'll work. My sense of where the world's going in freight road haulage is battery electric, like in so many things. Looks like it's going to be the winning technology. It's not certain, but that looks like where it's going. The one caveat is the distance. Battery electric currently do about 300 kilometres. So you're not going to want to be driving from Ballina to Dublin, because then you'd have to charge for 5 or 6 hours, and that's not economic. So using the rail freight in that way, I think in a low zero carbon, which we have to do, everyone has to be part of it, this new freight system, my bet, is going to be the way forward. And I'm dying to get that out from the Rail Review and to go to every single major manufacturing company within 50 kilometres of that line to say, I have a way out for you which is low carbon. Will you drive your container to the train station or to the marshalling yard? And by reopening that as a rail freight line, as well as passengers come down the line, but by using it as rail freight, that would be transformative. And if we were to build that line new today, it would probably cost about 15 or 20 billion. You wouldn't get it over any Department of Finance. But because it's sitting there underutilised, just with those two sections, probably each would cost 300-400 million to kind of reopen. That's an investment worth making on top of the rail freight carriages and starting that system. So that rail on track is not just a Wexford issue. In my mind, it's an economic corridor question for the country that we're going to have to consider in the coming months. And it's not in any budget, come back to what I said earlier on about the 70 billion worth of projects we have in train. Going back to Dunville Avenue now. That concern, you could read that as local people just objecting for the sake of it. I don't agree. I was one of the objectors, and I'm biased in this, but actually I think there was a key engineering issue there. I, as I said, was involved right back in the start of the metro, and it was always designed to actually come out. The design we ended up with was it was due to come out at the Beechwood station just south of Mimas there, and because there's a siding where you could get the tunnel machine out, boring machine. But in the intervening years, when the Danes built 3 metro lines and we built none, and same with every other, the technology changed actually towards the Danish system, where it's a driverless metro system. And the problem with what the TII NTA were proposing in Dunville Avenue was to reintegrate a driverless new type metro system onto the existing Lewis light rail type system, which was not designed to be driverless. Accessibility is important, we were saying earlier on. That station in Beach was a brilliant example of a really accessible platform type system. You would have had to cut off the entire station and reconfigure it. It would have been a bad engineering solution because you have 2 different effective engineering approaches meeting each other. I think the final solution, final solution is not the right term, but the clever option that's been presented to on board Panola, where we go as far as Charlemont, and then I had originally thought it would go to UCD via Donnybrook and then UCD Sandyford, but all the modelling, and you've got to trust the modelling people in this, say to me, no, actually that doesn't stack up, that actually southwest to Terranure, Rathfarnham, Firhouse, Tala is the better long-term line. This will take several decades, but that's the right way to go. And I think that then avoids you having to mix a light rail, accessible passenger no doors system to, you don't have to integrate 2 different engineering solutions. So I don't read that as an example of just local people objecting and getting their way.
Maybe Dart Southwest, sorry, I don't want to hog the thing, but maybe Dart Southwest then, for example, this talk of closing, you wouldn't have to be putting up and down gates, they'll just be closed permanently. So I'm just wondering what is the best solution in terms of engaging with something like that, because as somebody who lives in Wexford, I want that to be a faster line, so I'm just wondering.
There's a more immediate example we have where we're reopening the line from Foynes to Limerick, and there I think there's 24 crossing gates, and how we actually, if we can answer that in Foynes Limerick, I'll come back to you on Wexford Waterford.
Hey, we mentioned the Dublin Mountains bus proposal that we had. So the way in our proposal it was basically an hourly schedule and required 4 drivers, 2 of which were already in place, and we were told by the NTA that they don't have the resources, basically the drivers, to do it, and that resources they think is better prioritised elsewhere. So it's a thing that we're seeing everywhere. Driver shortages, it's slowed down bus connects to the Dublin network by about 2 years now. Connecting Ireland and loads of other plans. So, it's one thing that is now jeopardising basically every single government public transport policy, stable transport policy, almost. So, is it not time to intervene and, address it directly? Because I'm talking to people in Dublin Bus who are telling me that for every 4 people they hire, they're losing 3 drivers. So there seems to be a big retention issue. When do we get to a stage where they've gone through every single potential candidate who could be a bus driver and we just don't have anyone left?
It's an issue right across our economy. We are at full tilt. Every different sector I work in areas, you get the exact same problem. It has been a problem. It has delayed the rollout of the Bus Connects network, but it's not stopping it. My understanding is they are starting to get the numbers in. They're losing some at the same time, but all we can do is go out and advertising and making sure it's attractive, and that the companies have all the resources they need to help deliver those drivers. The mountain route to me looks very sensible and makes a lot of sense because there's huge benefit. Come back to what you said about leisure earlier on. There'd be real benefits to that. I also think it probably fits in my mind, within the Connecting Ireland network we're rolling out, which has been incredible success, starting in Kerry and Slayhead around the Dingle Peninsula and in Leitrim. We're seeing right across the country the same result. Multiple increases in the numbers of people taking it, huge amount of younger people using it, really, and that's before we even warm up and properly advertise it and put in bus stops so people know where it is and get a website that really sells it. But it is working and it's happening, and I think I can't remember where that mountain route was on the bus, because the Bus Connects did a public consultation and I'd be interested to go back and look, was that one of the routes that's in the Connecting Ireland service, because I think that might be a way of getting it over the line, and I think we will address the bus driver. So I mean, it's difficult because it's a function of the wider economic nature of the state, but we will manage that. We'll manage. So and it's a difficult thing to manage because you don't manage it by just pumping more money into the economy. You got to manage the economy in a sustainable way. That's a much wider, bigger issue. But we will have to do that.
Retention.
Agreed.
It's really lovely to hear so much about social justice, like all across the discussion, and I'm kind of wondering, how do you see active transport and public transport kind of fitting in with, this might be a bit left field, housing and the housing crisis that we're in, and how do you see it as one of the solutions, I suppose?
I think this, like, everything's up for grabs here at the moment. I'm giving my political view. There will be others who would have a different perspective, and we live in a democracy, so you gotta respect all the different views. And come back to said, turning it into a cultural war is not clever in terms of. My view is, I'm with Niall Cousins. I think the National Planning Framework is a good plan. I think if I simplify it right down, maybe Brian would have a different separate analysis, but I simplify it down as better balanced regional development, compact development, and low carbon development, what I hear it saying. And in truth, are we really delivering on that? If you look at the statistics, no. Half of the housing still is in the neighbouring outer counties around Dublin, not half, but a very high percentage. And the high cost of apartment building in urban areas means that there will be a review of the National Planning Framework, and my concern might be that we would give up on that compact low carbon solution and go towards, well, we know how to build semi-Ds, and there's nothing against semi-Ds, I live in one, but it would be an unsustainable type approach, because it's not just that you need high density for the sake of it. The reality is, when you're building in the centre, all the existing infrastructure you're using. You don't have to keep building out new schools, new footpaths, new whatever, and new all the services. That's hugely expensive, while the infrastructure you have in the centre closes down. CBC Sinks, or Westland Row, or St Mary's Haddington Row. I'm going my own area here now in terms of, how we've taken infrastructure out of the centre and we keep spending more building new in the outer areas. So it's touch and go as to what comes next. I was at a Cabinet Housing Subcommittee on Monday, and I have some encouragement because I see initiatives like, and Dara's all these names, Project Tussie and Creekona and all these, so many different schemes. Sometimes it's hard to know all what's going on, but actually there are schemes there which are designed to deliver in the central areas the apartment type developments we need, and they are more expensive, but we will need to support them, because if you look at the bigger picture in terms of having to build our infrastructure out and out, they're essential. But also I would argue that that we need in our city to avoid, as I said, what I sense from a distance San Francisco is going. Dublin can't be just a tech city where if you can afford it, if you're at the tech industry, you can afford high rents or very high value properties, and then we've social housing and we've nothing in between. We do need, I think, cost rental, affordable purchase, affordable rental, so you get a balanced mixed city. And those projects are there. A lot of them I think we may have to buy back from the private sector that may have been built to rent but now are not viable because of high interest rates. And I think and use the AHBs and others to build a lot of this type of infrastructure. The Land Development Agency is key. They are too slow in my mind, but they're the right direction. that we need to accelerate, and it wasn't just all their fault. You know, the mental hospital was delayed. It's now through planning, thank God. And there are that Donna Bate project's going ahead. That was delayed judicial review. That was turned around last week, so it's going now. Devoney Gardens is happening at last. Oscar Traynor has just started this week. So there are signs that actually things are coming and starting to really work. And if we put significant funding, which I believe we will, into additional schemes like Project Hussey and Creekona to incentivise and deliver on the city centre projects that we need to build, it's absolutely doable. The reason I mentioned the LGA and all this, because the LGA, I think, do buy into the concept of transport-led development, that transport and housing are inextricably connected, so that you put the housing where the transport connections are, and the transport connections go in advance of the housing, to make sure you kind of, it's an attractive place to live. Go back to what I said earlier. So the review of the national planning framework would be important in my mind, that we stick with what I think is the correct course, and it's not against Kildare or Wicklow or all the surrounding counties. They will have development, but we have to be careful it's just not a further hollowing out donut-led development, which would be bad for our cities in the long run. And that's up for grabs. That's going to be a political issue in the next year.
I might take an opportunity to ask a question, don't mind. I'm from Dunleary, where we have the fastest rollout of active travel in the world, which is fabulous. But one of the challenges we find locally is that often there can be a number of good solutions in how to implement active travel or pedestrianisation in a single area, but with Part 8 planning, the communities are led with a binary choice between one option or no option at all. Is there anything that can be done to Part 8 to give people more of an open choice when there's several options available rather than just a either or?
There's some councillors in the room that might be able to answer that better than I have. I haven't been near Part 8 as a councillor in a long time, but we are looking at, as mentioned earlier, the road traffic bill went through recently, and I was looking at not just Part 8 but doing experimental traffic orders, Section 38 I think they are of the 94 Act, and we were thinking of legislation for change in response to the Strand Road judgment, which I think had a very chilling effect in terms of what people were willing to do or were thinking of doing. But then I thought, no, because we had 1,000 Section 38 projects in train at the moment right across the country, and you don't want to stop them. So we looked at, there was a provision where the Minister could issue regulations, and we thought, okay, we'll do it by regulations, which we're drafting now, and give councillors better flexibility in that regard. With regard to the exact rules around Part 8 in terms of whether you can look at options, as I said, I'll have to pass to Janet Horner, who's an expert in the subject.
Yeah, I don't know if it's useful, but I would say, like, Dublin City Council have certainly gone down the route of like non-statutory consultations leading the way. So, for example, with Capel Street, I know we put out multiple rounds of consultation, and a lot of people got back to me when you tweet about it or something to say how many consultations you're actually going to do about this at this point, because they did consultation, which were all non-statutory, so therefore not mandatory parts of a Part 8 process. I think all of that serves to then, when we go to Part 8, there is a lot of body of evidence already there, so that you're saying, look, this is an option that we're putting forward. Yes, it's an either or option, but we've already evolved in what we actually want from it up to this point. So we've gone as far as we can go with a Section 38 in terms of as a road traffic thing. Everybody will know that there's issues with Capel Street. We haven't, the curbs are still there, there's still a carriageway there, and people would love to see better paving and have a lot of more structural improvements, but all of those would require Part 8. So we are sort of letting it bed down as a Section 38, and then we'll go to Part 8 with a fairly binary evolved design in mind, having gone through a lot of non-statutory consultations first. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I would say non-statutory consultation, even though it might have seemed a futile exercise to be filling in your 10th "do you want Capel Street to be traffic-free" survey, it does actually end up then when it comes to a councillor sitting in a room who may be ideologically inclined against that kind of project, are saying, look, for the 10th time 96% of people are saying they want to see something like this, it makes it a sort of more simple yes/no question, I think, at that point. So I think you want to do as much work as you can before you get to a section, a Part 8 planning application. And I realise now, people who shows how evolved people are in local government, that you can cite your Section 38 to your Part 8 very fluently. So that may not be fluent to everybody else in the room, but hopefully that is somewhat relevant.
About 5 of us probably.
Can I just make one other caveat addition to it? I love the Dún Laoghaire coastal cycle route. I use most weekends. It changes my life. It's just transformative. But we have to be slightly careful in describing Dún Laoghaire as one of the best in the world at anything. When, as Dave McWilliams rightly said, the council at the same time have decided just to expand the car park in the public baths, at the new public baths we built, which has to cross that lane. We're not Utrecht yet in Dún Laoghaire.
Minister, good evening everyone. Declan Harmon is my name. It's my first time attending a Dublin Commuter Coalition event in person, and I want to thank the organisers for putting it together, because it's been a brilliant event. Minister, when we hear you speak about Dublin, and not just transport issues in Dublin, but wider issues about the livability of our city, social issues in our city, it strikes me that it's the sort of passion that we would love to see from a elected person with executive responsibility for running the city, rather than from somebody who has national responsibilities in a particular portfolio. The blueprint, it seems to me, is now there from the Citizens' Assembly report, because it was overwhelmingly endorsed by our fellow citizens of Dublin who participated in that deliberative process. When can we expect to see action on that, and would it not be better if it were put to a plebiscite at the same time as the proposed referendum on the place of women in the home later in the year, so that the election for the position of Mayor of Dublin and the other structures that go with it could take place at the local elections next year? I think many of us fear that if it doesn't happen then, we'll be left waiting another 5 years for action on it.
That's a good point, and I listened to the debate earlier on this same subject, and I think firstly we do need to get the Limerick thing sorted. There is an issue there where we have to design and set out the powers of the Limerick Mayor in transport as well as other areas, so that's immediate in terms of delivery. But I am supportive of a directly elected Mayor for Dublin, always have been. I think will it be ready in time for the November potential referendum on the rights, the role of care in the home? I'll be honest, I think it's unlikely, because I just look at the timelines to deliver that. I can see exactly why strategically, so you'd have it decided before the local elections next year. But I'll be honest, I think I'll certainly take it away and look to see, can we accelerate it? But it is difficult. Just to throw out the word, I was mentioned there earlier on about the complexity of this is, if you look at Dublin, the Greater Dublin area is the area that, so the issue about how you address or how you involve Wicklow, Kildare, Meath, Louth, as well as the Ford councils is one of the issues, because Dublin isn't hermetically sealed. It's the city for a wider hinterland, and some of the issues there are politically complex in terms of how far would we go with the powers. I think we need one. I think a mayor would help, but I tend to agree with Kieran Ferrier, who was speaking earlier on, the gentleman here, I think maybe was responding, that I think even that the councils have a lot of power at the moment. I think that's what you were saying, wasn't it? I think it was a valid point, that a lot of times we don't necessarily use it, and I think one of the advantages of the mayor is that, a real elected mayor, is that they could maybe use the existing powers more, with more ambition.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Caffrey, and I'm actually, great segue into my question. I'm a member of Newbridge Community Development, and I've been advocating for the extension of the short up zone, which I'll totally accept what's coming, which is the inclusion in the Dublin commuter zone. And my question, there's loads of topics that we've hit on this evening, like increasing, activity in the nighttime economy, access, to transport for things outside of commuting that are massive issues in Newbridge, and people who are moving to Newbridge, particularly housing. There's things about housing and car parking spaces. So within Newbridge, in the outer realms of the town, there's housing that's gone up with that doesn't have, doesn't have a car parking space for each house. There's people who are priced out of Dublin moving down to Newbridge without cars, and they're being forced to buy cars. Their family from Dublin can't visit them in Newbridge because they don't have cars. We don't have town buses. Obviously this conversation is more about Dublin, but as you say, the greater Dublin area includes Newbridge, as we're now included in that zone. And one of the things that I'm quite interested in more at the moment is that as you say, the councils. So within Newbridge, our access to transport kind of crosses through 3 different budget streams, or 3 different project areas. One is town buses, another is active travel, and I understand the budget from that is managed by our local council. And what I'm just wondering is, in this vision, or in this kind of active travel, bus connect, all that, there is a relationship, or there should be a relationship with kind of that planning, and in the likes of Kildare, Meath and Wicklow. And is there a strategy for that, like you've just kind of touched on there, or is there an appetite for a strategy in making decisions and connecting that, because it will ultimately have an impact on the life of the city and where people choose to live, and reducing use of cars?
I think there is a strategy. I think it's set out. There was, a very good rural development plan published by the government 2 years ago. And central to that is the Town Centres First plan, which is, I think, really important at this time. Because go back to what I was saying earlier on a moment to change with COVID. Irish 19th century market towns, there's a question as to how we see them developing, and just like our cities, we have to be careful that they're not hollowed out, where all the housing developments on the outer ribbon roads are on the surrounding estates, and the centre of the town not developing. And I think there's a real possibility for us to reimagine the centre of the towns. And so I have the great good luck. As Minister, of Climate Minister, I'm going around to every single council in the country, meeting the management and the councillors to ask the question, how is the county going to deliver the 5-year development plan, climate development plan that they have to deliver? So I'm learning a lot and seeing a lot, and I knew the country fairly well anyway, but I see it starting to spark where it wouldn't be, and these Pathfinder projects could give us real potential. Carlow Town, it's not Newbridge, but
we're not in the moment.
No, but Carlow Town is starting. They're getting their town bus service, and we're putting in an active travel route to the university, and actually, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that could change. Naas is another Pathfinder project. Now, Naas County Council is less certain. They don't seem like they're going to be willing to jump over the fence. I hope they will make up their mind in the next month or two, because if they don't, the funding will have to go somewhere else. That's a very good idea. Because I can't imagine anything more encouraging for the councillors of Naas to say it's going to Newbridge. I would, but there's a lovely little project in Naas where you take out the through traffic to the centre, completely transform the town, and would link up to what's happening on the other active travel projects. So you'd have a transformative sense of, and it's towns around Sligo the same. I was up in Sligo recently. You could see it happening. Portlaoise, it could be happening too. So yes, my sense is we need to develop a competitive approach in a lot of these towns, that this is the one you want to really live in. This is the place where it's a really good place to raise a family.
Connecting that to the national strategy.
Yes, and connecting it to the Connecting Ireland bus service, so that you start to see, and the Connecting Ireland bus service is all designed to get you to the train station as well as to get you around. It's a joint up type service. So I think that idea of, when we put it out there, that there's a real risk that Naas is going to lose some 20 million euro investment that's sitting there ready to go. And if Newbridge came up with an alternative proposal, I think that would be very, very welcome.
Okay, Jason is saying we have time for one quick question, a quick answer too.
So, in regards to like traffic engineering and road engineering and planners, so I have 3 questions, or but the short question. One is like, what mode of transport do the planners and the engineers use? Second question is, do you think that affects the decisions that they make? And the third question is, can we get them to move to more public transport and active transport?
In my experience, they're like the rest of us. We should not turn this into a cyclist versus car drivers, or a bus versus train, or I don't think if someone's driving, it's probably because it makes rational sense. It's not. They're not doing it, I think, as a snub on anyone or as a disregard to what they're. I think our job is to make it easier for the more sustainable solutions to come, and that's an engineering task. My experience is most engineers I've met over the years and planners are absolutely aware now of the need for smart solutions. I would put a bigger question as maybe is our political system, because our political system is, and I would defend it to the hilt, but it's very attentive to public demands, and our public is still very much in the view, well, it's changing, but it's still in the view that roads equals development equals progress, and that's still there. I don't think it's as much in our planning and our engineering side. I think it's more in our political side, and I think that's a more open, fair place to have the debate, because politicians, our job is to espouse what they see the sense of the future. So I prefer to have the debate at the political level rather than blaming officials. I don't see them as the problem.
Great, thank you. I don't think we have time for further questions. I see loads of people who want to ask. I'm so sorry. But thank you so much, Mr. Ryan, for talking to us tonight. It's very illuminating. And thanks everyone for attending. Thank you.